Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer, and I hope you're all doing very well today. We're back at it. We are playing some more competitive League Golgari Midrange for your viewing pleasure. Before we get started, quick notification to all of my patrons. The scouting report for the month of March on Mono Green Tron is live, so if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and check that out. That is up on my Patreon page. Patreon exclusive content ready for you. And speaking of patrons, we have a brand new one. Let us welcome and say our heartfelt thanks to Ian Ray. Ian is a confidant. Welcome to the fold, Ian, and thank you so much for supporting this content. And thank you, as always, to all of my patrons. Very, very generous of all of you to help me stay in the hot seat here, stay in the pilot's chair, playing lots of Golgari for you, and we're doing it again today, so let's get into it. Quick warning before we get in, viewer discretion advised, there are a lot of non-games here. More non-games than usual. We're still playing BGX, so we've still got perhaps fewer non-games than the average modern deck will experience during the course of a full league, but this is, it's a little bit more non-game heavy, and by that I mean, of course, games that are over before they really begin, than you're perhaps used to seeing. But I'm just back from a weekend away. I just played a league, and this was it, so I wanted to upload it for you, but just know that going in. Know that going in. So anyway, let's begin. Let's play some Modern. We have won the die roll. We are on the play with a very well-balanced hand. We hope they're playing permanents out to the board that we can push in decay. But this is a pretty sweet hand in a blind game one. And, you know, I mentioned non-games, and this is probably the most glaring example you'll ever see of one. I swear to God, I don't know what happened here, but I went to go make my my play, which was going to be Hissing Quagmire pass to you. The opponent conceded the game, and then about a second and a half later, the opponent conceded the match. So, there you have it. We start off 1-0. Thank you, Z-Man2340. It's your good deed of the day. You helped make fair magic. You helped get the fair deck off to a great start, so you did your good deed for the day, my friend. And, yeah, that's you know, I don't know what more to say about that. I guess the scales have balanced after my, my league the other day where I lost power when I was about to win, right? So, nothing more to say about this. We start off 1-0. Seems okay to me. Okay, my friends, here we are for round 2. Because we just had a free win given to us round 1. We're gonna take it. We're gonna take it. This hand is a little bit sketchy. It's a little bit sketchy in a few ways. Number one, obviously triple Fatal Push. If this is not a deck where Fatal Push is effective, we are in a lot of trouble. Even if it is a deck where it's effective, on the play here, I think we are more or less obligated to go fetch Shock, because we need access to both colors here, with Field of Ruin as our second land and Thoughtseize. So it's a little bit sketchy in a couple different ways. Number one, like I said, Fatal Pushes. You don't know how good they're going to be in a blind game one. Number two, the one card that we're guaranteed is good is Thoughtseize, and we've got a Shock as well. Scavenging Ooze is also looking a little iffy here as a standalone threat with access to only one green mana right now. I still think it's a keep, but there's a lot not to like about it. However, we're going to keep it. The opponent mulls. The opponent mulls again. They're down to 5. They're going to keep their 5. We are going to fetch, and we're going to Shock as planned, and we're going to open on the Thoughtseize, and the opponent scoops it up. I promise, guys, those were the worst examples of non-games you're going to see. But I did warn you that there were some, but we're getting the worst of them out of the way at the start. So this is really interesting, because when the opponent scoops after a situation like this, you know, they mull to 5, whatever they're doing, their hand is likely to be crippled by a discard effect. They know that we are playing a BGX deck. They know that we went Overgrown Tomb into Thoughtseize. They know, even they might assume Jund, they might assume Abzan, they could assume like a 4-color Shadow deck, some kind of Traverse build. Doesn't matter that much. They have enough information to know that they're against an interactive black-green X midrange deck. We don't know the first thing about them, so they give up the win here. They give us a free win, but they probably assume, hey, I'm not going to mull to 5 and then beat a turn 1 Thoughtseize anyway when my opponent's kept 7. I'd rather just scoop to conceal information. So I respect that decision, and I actually went just straight to game 2 without making any sideboard choices. I thought about it. I thought about, well, you know, what decks are likely to scoop to a Thoughtseize in this type of situation. Let me know, if you would, what you guys do in this situation. Do you make any changes if your opponent just scoops to conceal information in game 1, or do you just run it back without sideboarding at all for game 2? Let me know what you would do, but I'll see you for game 2. Here we are, my friends, for game 2 of round 2. We haven't cast a spell yet, and we're still getting the wins so far. I should say we haven't resolved a spell because we did cast our Thoughtseize, right? I don't know what we're up against. This hand is functional. It's pretty slow on the draw. You know, Trophy is not your ideal turn 2 form of interaction, but this is a powerful hand with a lot of powerful cards. We've got good utility from our land base. We've got some catch-all, and we've got a Tireless Tracker with the lands to not only cast her, but to make some clues. So our opponent's keeping 7 this time. Looks like we're in for an actual game, and we will keep as well. Opponent's going to start off on the Horizon Canopy and the Glade Cover Scout. So this is Bogle's, and I think it now was absolutely the correct decision that our opponent would scoop to our Thoughtseize, because Bogle's mulling to 5 on the draw. If a Thoughtseize takes away their Bogle, they're probably not going to beat us, and they gain a lot of equity here by concealing information, because I would sideboard fairly heavily against Bogles, and now I'm just kind of playing with my main deck here. Scavenging Ooze, in context of what we now know, not a very good draw, so we just can only play our Quagmire and pass. Opponent lays out a Dryad Arbor, and then they lay out a Slippery Bogle. Okay, so they're going very wide. They're very well insulated against an Edict effect. And they pass back to us. Tarmogoyf is our draw. Well, we're continuing to draw threats. That's not very good, but I guess Tarmogoyf is a little bit better there than Scavenging Ooze, because it'll just, you know, it'll just get bigger as time goes on when we start casting these trophies, which is basically our plan. And the 1-2 can, in theory, wall off attacks as just about as well as the 2-2 here. But looks like they're starting to make some plays. They play a Griff's Boon. This is +1/+0, grants flying, and can come back from the graveyard. They've got their other, more common recursive enchantment in the form of Rancor. So they're stacking up this Bogle and another Rancor. So this is all very good for them. Flying Trample, cracking in for 6, and we just draw more threats, so not looking very good for us, to be honest. It's just going to be the Treetop Village and pass holding up Assassin's Trophy. Nothing more to do here. Maybe we can take away the boon and throw a chump block in the way if that ends up being the play. That's a little bit worse now, because Ethereal Armor is a really nice payoff. That makes the Bogle a 10-5. They're just stacking up the Bogle. Very, very nice. And, yeah, this is why we need to be able to sideboard against Bogle. So trying to play against a progression like this with our main deck, not a high rate of success, but we will try to play it out. I do think we have to take away that Griff's Boon, even though it can come back, and even though there are bigger payoffs, this just allows us to throw a blocker in the way. They still trample, they still put us down to 6, but, you know, it's just kind of a no-win situation here. I don't think we have outs. We draw Thoughtseize, and they're empty-handed, so pretty poor. We'll play out another Tarmogoyf, hold up another Assassin's Trophy. That's about all we can do. But unfortunately, even if they blank on their top deck, they can just kind of buy back the Griff's Boon. And I don't think eating the Griff's Boon with a Scavenging Ooze is good there either. You know, we just don't have anything to do. They see the line getting boon back, and we'll just scoop to that. We're just simply not beating this. So, yeah, very rather similar to what we might expect against a good Bogle's progression when they're on the play and when we don't know what we're up against. That looked like a lot how game 1 can go, right? But of course that was game 2. So, again, the opponent's decision to scoop to our Thoughtseize, I think, paid off very well for them there. However, now going into game 3, we do actually know what we're up against. So let us take a quick look at the sideboard. Alright, my friends, what to do against everybody's favorite modern deck, Bogles? Well, first of all, remember that this is a slightly different list from the one you saw me play last month. If you have not seen this month's deck tech, you can find it in the description below, but we have made a couple changes, and therefore our sideboarding might be just a tad different. So, in terms of what we like, Engineered Explosives is arguably our best card out of the sideboard here. It's very, very nice. Gigantic X for 1 potential, really punishes them for doing what they're doing, gets around hexproof really well. Maelstrom Pulse is good. It's good. It's not necessarily as good as EE, but, 2 for 1 potential. Just being able to interact with their auras in general is nice. And, what else do we like here? Well, Damnation is definitely good enough to come in. They have some forms of protection, or pseudo-protection, or ways to mitigate that. It's not just you find it. It's not an I win button in the matchup, but it is pretty good. Definitely good enough to come in. Otherwise, I'm not necessarily seeing all that much that completely thrills me, but I think Kitchen Finks and Fulminate Er Mage are both pretty playable. Finks is just a way to gum up the ground, kind of a value blocker, or, of course it can clock if you're ahead on board. Fulminate Er Mage is a way to answer Dryad Arbor, and that can be important. There are hands where they kind of have to stack up Arbor with all of their auras. Fulminate Er Mage as an out to that, or as just a value piece in general, chump block and Stone Rain them, or just kind of Stone Rain them out of the game. It can happen. So these cards are reasonable, but they're not really the haymakers we're looking for. However, some of them might come in, but these 3 cards will come in for sure. Now, what do we not like? Well, some of the spot removal that only hits creatures is kind of bad. So I'm pretty comfortable cutting most, if not all, Fatal Pushes. We'll consider leaving in the 4th. It can hit Arbor, it can hit Core Spirit Dancer, but we don't want to leave in too many Fatal Pushes. I am also pretty content to cut Collective Brutality for the same reason. None of the modes are all that impressive here in this matchup. It's not the worst card, but not the best either. Liliana the Last Hope, I think, is a pretty clear cut. She doesn't do much with her +1. Her -2 does even less. Not the card we want to see here. Otherwise, the rest of our main deck is more or less fine. So if we just say these 5 cards can come out, I think I like Fulminator. I rate Fulminator a little bit more highly than Finks. So what if we bring in 2 Fulminator? This final Fatal Push, if you're really low on the card, the 3rd Fulminator can come in for it. I think I left 1 in. I think exactly 1 is fine. It's not going to ruin your day entirely if you see it. What we don't want is to get flooded on Fatal Pushes while they kill us with a Bogle. That is the worst. But having 1 Fatal Push, I think that's fine. And I think I like the first push better than the 3rd Fulminate Er Mage. But you could kind of go either way with that. Regardless, we've got... those are kind of, marginal decisions. We've got a lot of cards that are really good, and we hope to leverage them to the best of our ability. Let's go to Game 3, see what happens. Alright, so on the play here against Bogles, we've got a hand with a lot to like. We have turn 1 Thoughtseize is very, very good. We have one of our very best cards in Engineered Explosives. And we have another one of our best cards, 2 copies no less, of Liliana of the Veil. Problems with this hand? Number 1, it's very soft to an opening Leyline of Sanctity. Leyline is going to shut off our Thoughtseize, and even if we hit our 3rd land for Liliana, it's going to shut off the Liliana Edict. That's going to mean we are our effectiveness is blunted severely if they open on Leyline. However, we still have the kind of safety valve against a traditional Bogle start if they have a 1-drop into a lot of 1-drop auras. Engineered Explosives is still our out to that. So even though we're soft to Leyline, and even though Leyline or not, we need to hit at least one more land, ideally 2 lands, to make this hand good, this is still a definite keep. But we have to recognize the limitations and be ready to try to account for them. Opponent's going to keep 7. A little worrisome, but at least they don't have the Leyline. Well, good. So we'll open up Swamp, Thoughtseize You. Let's see, the opponent's got a nice balanced land to spell ratio, 2-lander. Unfortunately, they have a very Thoughtseize-proof hand. So they have 2 Bogles. They have the Slippery Bogle, the Glade Cover Scout. On top of that, they have a 3rd creature. They have a Core Spirit Dancer. So they play a low threat density and then a higher count of the aura effects. So often you can take away their only threat with a Thoughtseize, then you're off to the races. That is not an option here. Therefore, I think we actually definitely don't want to take a Bogle. Unusual, but true in this case. We might want to take the Core Spirit Dancer, because this is a card that we actually don't have an answer to. We don't have our 1 Fatal Push. We don't have Decay. We won't even necessarily successfully Edict her away with the Liliana. This card could get completely out of control, so as uncommon as it is to be in this situation, we might actually want to take her. Then there's a couple auras. We could take the auras too, just to slow them down, to slow the roll of Spirit Dancer if indeed they go on heavily on her. And if that's the case, we have Grifspoon and Rancor. Rancor would be the clear take there, because Rancor does not come back unless it goes to the graveyard from the battlefield. So, in my opinion, the best takes are probably either Rancor or a Core Spirit Dancer, and in the end, I did indeed just take away the Rancor. So they've got a threat-dense hand without a ton of gas. Even Grifspoon, it's recursive, but it's not all that scary in terms of putting a clock on, right? So they go Thicket into Bogle. They'll pass it back. And we will draw Inquisition. Alright, well that's actually just a fine draw. We still really need that other land, though. But for now, Inquisition lets us have a pretty good turn, and we see that they took a Daybreak Coronet off the top of their deck for their draw step. Well, that is just clearly the big payoff card. I think we just need to take that there. We don't really know how our next few turns are going to develop. Whether or not we draw land is going to be a major player dictating what we want to do. If we don't draw land, we could draw any number of things. So it's unclear what our sequencing is going to be. Therefore, I think we just take the most powerful card in the deck. Or in their hand, excuse me, which is the Coronet. I've spoken in the past before about how, you can kind of get them because of Coronet's wording here. It'll, as a patron of mine, Dan, pointed out, not only can you destroy their creature sometimes in response to Coronet being cast, if you just remove the only other aura, Coronet will fall off as well. So it is tempting sometimes to leave the Coronet around because it has the 2-for-1 potential. We can really blow them out that way, but again, if we're not sure what our sequencing is going to be, I think we just take away the more powerful card. So they're pretty well, they're starting to develop their board to decent effect here. They're insulated against an Edict. They've got an aura on a Bogle. They're kind of starting things off. We draw Scavenging Ooze, and we are just kind of living the nightmare here. Living the nightmare. Our turn 1 Thoughtseize didn't cripple them, and we failed to hit our 3rd land on curve. So you could run out the EE there, and it wouldn't be the worst, but I'm reluctant to expose that to a Disenchant style effect, and I think I'm not going to win even through that EE if I don't draw a 3rd land. So I'm just assuming I'm going to draw a 3rd land. Therefore, we sandbag the EE for a turn. We play out the Ooze. They play Ethereal Armor, which is not as strong of a payoff as Coronet, but is probably the second most powerful aura overall. And they come across with a 4-3. And it flies, so we just take the damage. They've still got that Spirit Dancer in hand plus 1 unknown. Alright, we draw a swamp. Well, that's just a beautiful thing. We finally hit our third land, and it's, thank goodness it's untapped. It's definitely EE time. We're going to sweep up this whole board here. You know, not much point, in my opinion, in holding that up. I think we just clear it out so we can get in with our ooze and attack. However, they have other plans. They're going to path our ooze. Sure, that doesn't upset me at all. Now we've got ramped a little bit. The ooze, you know, would have been nice to keep it around, but not exactly breaking my heart here. Okay, opponent's got a Windswept Heath off the top, and then they play their core Spirit Dancer. That was actually a fantastic draw for them, because now they can fetch a Dryad Arbor at instant speed. Normally, we would be very happy to just edict away that Spirit Dancer if they've got one card stuck in hand. That feels great. However, you know, they've got the way to play around that. We draw a third Liliana of the Veil. Well, I guess we're just going to edict anyway, even though we know the Dryad Arbor play is going to get us here. And sure enough, it does. They'll fetch in response. They sack the Arbor. I still think that was the only real play we had. Excuse me. Opponent's tapping mana, and they have a Rest in Peace off the top. Okay, I mean, that does something against us, but boy, am I happy that's not an Aura. I am so happy that's not an Aura. So, they'll pass. And we draw Dark Confidant. Alright, you know, that's a pretty decent draw, and it's kind of tempting to just play him and hope, but I think we have to really just make sure we're taking care of this Spirit Dancer. Now they have so many dead draws off the top. If they draw an Aura, it just rots in hand. And they sure have a lot of those in the deck. So we play a new Lily, we ditch the old one, and we Edict. Alright, opponent draws a Bogle, so that's a pretty great draw for them, to be honest. Pretty great draw. What do we have? What do we have off the top? Well, it's a Verdant Catacombs, huh? Super interesting decision here. So we could do a couple things. We could play a Tireless Tracker, then we could play a Fetch Land, and we could make 2 clues. We could play a Dark Confidant. Then we could take our Liliana of the Veil up into Edict range. Unfortunately, we'd be ditching our other Lily that way, but then we're just saying, look, can you beat us? Can you outgrind a Bob and a Tracker and 2 clues already on the field with your Bogle plus your top deck? So that's an option. The other option here is just to kind of hedge a little bit, whether it be Tracker into land, maybe tick Lily up, pitch the Bob, or just play another Lily and then play the Bob. All of these are kind of not maximizing the potential of any of our cards, but it's kind of hedging. It's kind of playing safe. So there's a few different options you could really explore here. I did, in the end, choose to lead off with a Tireless Tracker. We're making a clue. We're making another clue. And we're going to tick the Liliana up. We're going to pitch the Bob. So we're kind of half and half here. We're erring on the side of keeping our Lilianas around. This way, if they like rip another creature for turn, you know, we can edict them both away next turn. So we did have to ditch our Bob in order to pull that off. Doesn't feel great, but you know, our life total is not exactly the highest either, right? So opponent doesn't have any way to force damage through and get rid of this Liliana, so I'm very happy with them just drawing and then saying, pass to you. Our clue finds us an Inquisition on their end step. We'll untap, we find another Tracker. Okay, well, neither of those draws are necessarily the greatest, but I guess we'll lead off on the Inquisition to see exactly what the opponent's up to. And they just scoop it up. They just scoop it up. So apparently it was not anything great. They're going to get their Bogle edicted away. You know, maybe they just sandbagged a land hoping to entice us to tick the Liliana up instead of down. That's my best guess. But regardless, they just scoop it up. They just scoop it up. Liliana of the Veil just shows you how difficult it is for them to beat Liliana when we are otherwise ahead on board. They could also have drawn a Leyline of Sanctity for turn, maybe a second Rest in Peace. Who knows? But it wasn't Path to Exile, and it wasn't an Aura. And it probably was not another creature, so that much I can tell you. But regardless, the Bogle's opponent has seen enough. They had a hand that was very resilient to our turn 1 Thoughtseize, and we also failed to hit land number 3 by turn 3. Fortunately, we hit it by turn 4, it was untapped, and Engineered Explosives turned out to be a 4-for-1 in our favor. Very, very good. They could eventually have kind of wound the clock back to a 3-1 with that buying back that Griff Spoon at some point, but still, it was a 4-for-1 at the time, and hey, their Rest in Peace made sure it was a 4-for-1 for good. So EE was our big catch-up card there, and then we were able to leverage our Lilianas of the Veil to keep the board clear, and we were able to take over the game with a Tireless Tracker and Liliana. So, kind of a strange little match where they scooped to our Thoughtseize turn game 1. Game 2, we just got run over not knowing what we were against and didn't really have much of a chance whatsoever. And then here in Game 3, it was a little bit closer, but ultimately we kind of just ascended to a commanding position here in turn 8, and the opponent just scoops it up. So after a free win round 1, and after a match against Bogles where we emerged victorious, we advanced to 2-0 in the league. Feels good, my friends, and I will see you for round 3. And here we are, winning the die roll again with a great hand, to be honest. Yeah, certainly looking good enough for me to keep in a blind game 1. We've got Painless Mana, we've got 2 of each color. We've got a very well-balanced hand. I am a fan, and I will be keeping, as will the opponent. Alright, Blooming Marsh, pass to you. Uh-oh, Blooming Marsh Inquisition. Well, looking like a potential mirror match to me, and they will take away our Dark Confidant. Very sad. Very sad. I like running out the Skoos here. Twilight Mire, okay. Inquisition taking away Fatal Push, and Thoughtseize taking away Liliana, the Last Hope. Well, yeah, I mean, you got it. The 3 discards in the opening 2 turns is a bit rough. But hey, the Kalitas. Kalitas is a pretty good draw, so we will run out the Treetop Village, because that lets us play the Kalitas next turn. We'll eat our own Confidant just to get that extra point of damage in, and we'll pass. Okay, they've got a Tarmogoyf, but no 3rd land. Very interesting to note. No 3rd land. So, here on the end step, I went ahead and ate my own Liliana. I suppose, all else being equal, you'll want to eat away at the opponent's graveyard in these mirror matches. However, so far the best Skoos targets have been on my side. Eating Dark Confidant allows us to obviously gain a life and get a counter on the Ooze, and eating the Last Hope allows us to shrink the Goyf. Thoughtseize, potentially decent draw, but it's clearly the play here to slam Kalitas. Even though we could Thoughtseize and then attack with Treetop Village over the Tarmogoyf, that's pretty good too. Kalitas is by far the clear play in this window. It's going to help us play around an Edict effect if they have a 3rd land and a Lily of the Veil, and it is overall just such a powerhouse in the matchup. You definitely want to take your window to resolve it when possible. So they do have a 3rd land, but it enters tapped. It's a rival Ape Village, and they've got a 2nd Goyf. Alright, how good would Maelstrom Pulse be here? We don't draw the Pulse, but we draw Lily of the Veil. That is still fine, and unfortunately this basic forest is making it so we cannot Thoughtseize into Lily, but I will have to content myself with Lily, Edict you, make a zombie, and then attack for 6. Seems pretty good to me. Remember that there is the chance to potentially shrink the Goyf as well, but we're going to kind of hold that up, maybe use it as a combat trick if they try to get frisky and attack our Lily. We'll see, but they're going to play a Tireless Tracker without a 4th land to follow it up, so that is pretty rough, And yeah, sure enough, on the end step, I'll just make the Goyf down to a 1-2. Collective Brutality is our draw. Well, that is just excellent. And here, we could do a couple different things, but I actually chose to just totally empty my hand out. We're going to drain them for 2 of their Brutality because we should be able to end the game this turn doing it that way. Then we get to tick the Liliana up asymmetrically, and they just scoop it up. So, absolutely wrecked the opponent here game 1, despite the fact that they had 3 discard spells in the first 2 turns. That, my friends, is why discard is not, in my opinion, where you want to be in the BGX mirrors. Obviously, this is game 1. They just had it in the opener. It's so good. It's so good to cast Inquisition, Thoughtseize, following up with Tarmogoyfs in your first few turns against so many decks. But here, all it does is trade 1 for 1. You want threats and you want answers, and this showed absolutely why, in my opinion. Now, the opponent didn't do anything wrong. They didn't do anything incorrect. I'm not taking anything away from them. They got stuck on 2 lands for a little bit too long, and we ripped Kalitas and Liliana off the top. That's basically all there was to it. So, it just shows you how much these mirror matches come down, unfortunately, to the top deck wars. And we won the top deck war this time. So, let's take a look at our sideboard, see what we want to do in the mirror. Alright, my friends, the Golgari Civil Wars are upon us once again. It's very sad. It's very sad. It breaks our heart, but, you know, they started it, right? So, what do we do? Well, we want threats, and we want answers, and Planeswalkers are wonderful in this matchup. Nissa, Liliana, both very, very good. I like these X for 1 potential cards, Engineered Explosives, Maelstrom Pulse. They are for sure ones that come in my opinion. Kitchen Finks is also fantastic. Absolutely fantastic card in the matchup. And Deathmark is certainly good, even though it misses Bob. Beyond that, we actually have a lot of other cards that are quite reasonable. Nile Spellbombs are reasonable, for sure, no question about that. They can mess with whatever recursion they have going on. They can kind of control the sizes of the graveyard. Sometimes it can grow a Goyf if we need it to. Sometimes it can shrink some Goyfs. Very reasonable inclusion. Ditto Fulminate Er Mage. Fulminate Er Mage is just immense value. The one thing I'll say about Fulminator is I don't rate it as highly in the Golgari mirror as I do against other BGX variants. It is better against Jund and Abzan and Sultai. However, still a perfectly reasonable card here. And remember, we're now playing with Damnation instead of Languish. And Damnation is definitely a card that's strong enough to come in, but remember that we are on 15 creatures main deck now, right? So definitely we're on the high side of creatures as far as the threat count is concerned. Just something to factor in, right? But these 6 cards are, in my opinion, the ones that definitely come in, and then we'll take a look at the other 6. So, these 6 are in. What don't we like? Well, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Discard is bad. Out it comes. Don't feel awful if you don't have enough to do. You have to leave in a discard spell or 2. That's totally fine. But if you can cut them in a BGX mirror, they should, in my opinion, be cut. Collective Brutality is the same thing. It's just kind of a worse discard spell in some ways. Of course, it can kill a Dark Confidant, it can drain. Those things are all fine, but I believe we have better things to do in this particular matchup than play Collective Brutality. In also mid-range mirrors, we want to cut a land, and they will be casting trophies and activating Fields of Ruin, most certainly. So Blooming Marsh comes out instead of a basic. You might bring out a basic Forest against Jund, but here we want to cut a Blooming Marsh, in my opinion. So, is there anything else we don't like? Well, no, everything else is very good. Everything else is very, very good. Liliana of the Veil is one that we could maybe side out a copy of on the draw. Just a little bit harder to leverage effectively on the draw. So I believe I did so for this particular game, and that leaves us 3 spots. Well, I think Damnation comes in here. I think Damnation is good enough to bring in the mirror. And then I went ahead and brought in 2 Fulminate Er Mages, decided not to bring in the Nile Spell Bombs, even though they are reasonable. I think I like Fulminator a little bit better. And then what I would do with this configuration is bring 1 Fulminator out and bring the 4th Liliana back in on the play. I think that's all very reasonable. And if anything, we have a little bit too much to do in a mid-range mirror. We have a little bit too much to do in the BGX matchups, and not enough to come out. But do note that none of these cards that we brought in are in the sideboard specifically for mid-range. They're all predominantly for other use cases. It's just that we have a lot of overlap, a lot of these cards that we can leverage really well when we're in a BGX mirror match. So in any case, that's how I sideboard, that's what I did, and let's go over to game 2. Alright, my friends, on the draw here, post side in the Golgari Midrange mirror, and our hand is incredible. It's just incredibly powerful. This is just exactly the type of thing you want to see. Our opponent's kept 7 as well. Opponent goes Swamp into Inquisition. Well, they leave in the discard, they get rewarded for it by having some in the opening hand. And they take away the Skoos, which is interesting. Was not really my first expectation, but there you have it. Very interesting, very interesting. Hissing Quagmire is the clear play here. Twilight Mire into Tarmogoyf. Okay, fair enough. We're continuing to draw lands at this point. We're drawing another Field of Ruin. So, I often, when on the draw, as we are, in a BGX mirror, I don't necessarily like running out a creature into a potential Liliana of the Veil. However, I think that the fact that our Tarmogoyf can wall off their Tarmogoyf, that's actually enough incentive for me to want to play it out. That's sufficient incentive to risk running into the Liliana Edict, right? Opponent plays a Blooming Marsh, they tap out, and sure enough, they have the Liliana Edict, so that's a bit unfortunate, but at least we can Edict them back, right? And that's indeed what we're going to do. We're continuing to draw lands, which is awkward in a couple different ways. Number one, it's not gas. It's not gas. We want the gas, we don't have it. Not great. Number two, all of the lands that we've drawn have been not ideal for playing out turn 2 Tarmogoyf, turn 3 Liliana. So we've had to reveal a little information by running out the field, and now we kind of have to either shock or waste a fetch land here. I chose to fetch instead, but either way, our land draws have not been ideal. But we get to Edict the Goyf, so we're behind in one and only one way. We're behind on the turn count, basically. We're behind for having gone second, but otherwise we're keeping pace with them. We're also behind on the life total, but that's not a huge deal. Well, they've got a really nice curve out. They went Inquisition into Goyf, into Liliana, into Tracker plus Fetchland. So Liliana takes up. We're going to lose a Field of Ruin there. I'd rather keep my other lands around. And hey, wouldn't you know it, we draw a Tracker of our own. So that's pretty good. We'll take up the Liliana first. They've only got one card in hand, so this was actually very important. In case they're holding on to a Fatal Push here, we've got to get it out of their hand. It's not a push, it's a second Lily. Sure enough. We play a Tracker of our own, and we make a Clue of our own. So we're going to be behind on clues here. They get to make a second one on the end step. A little bit unfortunate, but we are in the game. We are very much in the game. Ooh, unfortunately, they are rewarded yet again for leaving the discard in by drawing it here at the absolute opportune time, so they get to have their cake and eat it too. We were hoping they would either have to Edict our Tracker, cashing in their Lily, or they would choose to tick up and try to keep their Lily around. Either way, and then therefore our Tracker sticks around. Either way, we were hoping for one or the other, but they get to have their cake and eat it too. Inquisition our Lily, and Edict away our Tracker. They're finding another land off of clues, so they keep the clue train rolling, and they get to kill our Liliana. Well, we draw a Tireless Tracker. Doesn't look very good at this particular juncture, and to be frank, it's not. But if they, brick for a little while here, this could potentially catch us back up. We'll have to see what the opponent finds. They're going to crack a clue. They found a fatal push. Well, that's just absolutely perfect for them. Very nice mana-efficient turn here. They get to make their tracker huge, play a Scooze, push our tracker, and we draw a Forest. So, not very good at all. Okay, Dark Confidant. I mean, this card could in theory catch us up, and we're going to play it out. But in practice, we are very far behind on board now. And the fact that they drew a untapped land for a turn is actually, it looks pretty innocuous, but it's actually quite bad for us. Because if you do the math, they crack a clue here, and then they move to attacks, and they actually have exactly lethal on board. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 creatures in our graveyard alone, plus the Tarmogoyf over across the table. The Scooze can become a 6/6, so we have to chump block here. And that means any hope of a comeback is pretty much dead in the water. With the exception of just ripping our Damnation off the top. So, we don't rip our Damnation, we rip another land, and that's going to do it. So, our opponent curved out extraordinarily well. Those discard spells looked really good, but those could easily have been, you know, when they ripped a Tireless Tracker off the top, it could have just been discard. Or, if we were a little bit ahead on board, if we had gone first and they had had those discard spells, you know? I don't think we can be results-oriented thinking and say, well, the discard was really good for them. And, you know, the discard was okay here. It played a role, but really, their curve of Liliana of the Veil into turn 4 Tireless Tracker into fetch land, that's really what did it to us. That's really what got us. So, regardless, we just kind of got out top decked just like we out top decked them in game 1. They got us here back in game 2. Just kind of how these matches go a lot of the time, but I will see you for game 3. Alright, my friends, here we are. Here we are for game 3, and oh, this is so painful. We've got a mulligan. We don't want to keep the one-lander. You may have seen in my previous league, I kind of excoriated our mirror match opponent for keeping a one-lander. And to be fair to them, you know, they at least let on a Blooming March. This would be even riskier to keep the one-lander of a swamp when we're leaning so heavily on the need to find not only a second land, but a green second land. So, as much as I hate to mulligan, we do have to mull here. Our opponent will keep 7, and we mull to an unplayable 6. Just a no-land 6. What are you going to do? We got a mulligan. And here we have, it's a functional 5, it's a fine 5, but it lacks the catch-up power, right? If we have to mull to a 5 in a BGX mirror, we want Dark Confidant in our opening hand. We want to hope that the Confidant somehow lives and can catch us back up. We want Planeswalkers in our opening hand. We want to make it a Liliana the game. We would love, like, 2 lands, Confidant, double Liliana, hope to draw our 3rd land. Something like that would be amazing. So this is a functional hand, but it's not one that I'm optimistic about. However, we for sure keep it. And what I did here is I decided to keep that Fatal Push on the top. We're going to run out our Verdant Catacombs, and then, you know, we'll see what they do turn 1, I guess, and we can either choose to shuffle that away or keep it on top. They lead on the Treetop Village. That makes me want to, you know, leave the Fatal Push on top, which I was already kind of leaning toward doing anyway. Definitely going to have some good targets for the push, so it does mean we have to take a little bit of extra pain here to get our Tarmogoyf down and still have access to double black, but I think that was correct on the whole. Opponent's got a Collective Brutality for the Tarmogoyf. They're pitching an Overgrown Tomb, so bad news for the opponent. That just makes the Goyf angry. It just makes the Goyf angry. The Collective Brutality will resolve. Fatal Push goes to the bin because they escalated once -2/-2 and the discard mode. So we do lose our push, but the opponent just kind of unmulliganed us, right? They just kind of wasted that Overgrown Tomb, at least if you want to look at it that way. So we draw land, not very exciting, but it is something that we do probably need eventually as the third land, and we'll, now our Tarmogoyf is nice and big. It's a 3/4, so we're actually in an okay position, potentially. Potentially okay. We'll have to see what else the opponent has for us. And it is another Collective Brutality, pitching Engineered Explosives, which is going to grow the Goyf even more. But this time they're going to have a target that does actually die to the -2/-2, and they get to totally strip our hands. So, again, just like the Inquisition's Game 1, Collective Brutality, not necessarily a great card against us. I think one that's clearly worse than a lot of alternatives, but it's certainly, they're rewarded for keeping these cards in by seeing them in the opening hand, that's for sure. They're very, very poor top decks in the mid to late game. However, so far so good for the opponent, and they've just got it all. They've just got a Fatal Push to take care of our Goyf. So we're back to being very behind, and our top deck is a Blooming Marsh. So I think we have to sandbag that, because now we're really dependent on finding a catch-up card like Tireless Tracker. We also know that they're leaving all kinds of discard effects in, so maybe, just maybe, we can have them unmulligan us again by casting a Thoughtseize or Inquisition. But looks like they're going for the Scavenging Ooze first. Great follow-up card to all those kill spells, that is for certain. We draw a Kalitas Trader of Get. Well, we couldn't possibly really be punished anymore, could we? Like the one card in our deck that costs exactly 4 to play. Now we have to run out our Blooming Marsh. Now we were just sitting on a Kalitas. We just kind of wasted a turn. I do think it was correct, but Max punished, and the Ooze is gobbling up all kinds of stuff. See what the opponent's got for us. A Scavenging Ooze attacks us for 4. Okay. They have a Blooming Marsh, and they're going to pass, so maybe they're a bit flooded. I don't know why they didn't attack with Treetop Village, though, in that case. Maybe respecting the possibility of a removal spell in our hand, right? But we'll have to see. We draw Swamp. Well, that's not very good either, so just running out the Kalitas, hoping for the best here. Opponent will Field of Ruin us on the end step. That's not a good sign. We could get Push here, or Swamp here, off the field to bluff Fatal Push, but Forest is just a better land. We can maybe catch up with a Scooz of our own at some point, so better to get the correct land than to bluff, and their last card is Fatal Push. Alright, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? They just had it all after we mulled to 5. The Faux Pas with their Collective Brutality does not look like it will punish them. And what is their draw for turn? Well, we don't quite know yet. They're firing up the Treetop Village, hitting us for 8. And it was a Hissing Quagmire. Not the greatest draw, but not the worst. Certainly a whole heck of a lot better than our Blooming Marsh. So it finally happened, my friends. We finally dropped a mirror match on this channel. And yeah, I mean, pretty brutal mull to 5. And then our stuff, what we had going on, our opponent's stuff just lined up super well against it. And, credit to the opponent. They made it happen. They had the right spells in the right times, and they punished us. They pushed the damage through in a timely fashion, and that was about that. So, feels very, very bad to drop the mirror match, because almost nothing about our 2 losses in this match here was within our control. And to be fair to the opponent, almost nothing of what they did Game 1 was in their control. So it's one of life's little ironies, right? That the BGX decks are these renowned interaction matters, decisions matter decks. And insofar as they relate to the rest of the format, that's true. That's why we're the proverbial 45-55, 55-45 deck, right? Because we don't have so many very lopsided matchups. We don't have so many free wins or free losses. We we prune the decision tree with love and care. We let the branches grow. We let it flourish because we like to make decisions that matter. But the irony of all that is sometimes in these BGX mirrors, it's just literally a top deck war, or just literally who has the better cards. Unfortunate but true. I have been the beneficiary of that many a time, and here we were on the receiving end of the bad luck. So we dropped the mirror match. At least the good guys still won, right? At least a rock deck still gets the win here, even if it wasn't ours. But unfortunate. Not much we could have done differently there as far as I can see, but as always, guys, let me know what you see, what lines I should have taken, if any. Regardless, I hope you are enjoying this league, and I will see you for round 4. Okay, my friends, round 4 of this competitive league, and we've won the die roll yet again, winning a lot of die rolls this league. But what do we do with this hand? What do we do with it? It's got a great curve. Push. Yeah, maybe missing the 2-drop slot, but a tap land on turn 2. Liliana the Veil turn 3, Kalitas or Tracker turn 4, right? Well, wrong, because there's no black mana. Very, very strange, very unusual and unlucky to have a 3-land hand with no black sources, but we have it here, and it's got the upsides. We are on the play. So maybe having to trust in our top deck a little bit more. Our odds, we see one fewer card, right? So our odds are a little bit lower to actually draw that black land naturally. However, we are starting out ahead, you know. We can play our Treetop Village turn 1, and then hopefully the opponent won't develop their board too quickly. So definitely a bit of a toss-up here. I actually went ahead and chose to gamble. I chose to keep it. The upsides are real. We only really need to find one black source naturally, because we can at least Fatal Push, and then we can eventually fix our mana with Field of Ruin. I think the upsides are there. I was also perhaps a little bit skittish from mulling down to 5 in the mirror match. So I went ahead and kept 7. The opponent's going to mulligan. The opponent's going to mulligan again. Okay, well, now I feel great about this keep, because my hand has enough power that it will get there if I find a black source. So, opponent's going to mull to 5, and they're going to pass. Cavern of Souls naming humans. Alright, this is always a really interesting matchup, and they do have Cavern into Vial turn 1, which is pretty good. And there it is, baby, the Blooming Marsh with our first draw step. Well, the somewhat risky keep is rewarded. Now we are in business. Now we can do just about everything we're going to need to do, it seems. But the opponent, let's see here. They play an Ancient Ziggurat, okay. And it is going to be a Kitesail Freebooter. So, let's read this card for those who don't know. When 1/2 flying. When Kitesail Freebooter enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. Exile that card until Kitesail Freebooter leaves the battlefield. Do note that the way this rules text is templated means that you can successfully respond to the Kitesail Freebooter trigger with a removal spell. What will then happen is the removal, your hand will be revealed, but nothing will be taken. That is not the case for some older cards like Tide Hollow Sculler, where the templating is such that the enter the battlefield ability is one ability, and then it has a separate leaves the battlefield ability. Do not ever respond to a Tide Hollow Sculler with a Fatal Push. But here, we are going to profitably respond to the Freebooter with a Fatal Push. That's just clearly the play here. We keep the board clear, we keep them from getting us. We don't have a second removal spell, or we didn't. Now we do. Now we do. So, Fatal Push is a pretty great draw there. Just such a good card in the matchup in general, right? So, pass over to the opponent, playing our Field of Ruin out. They're going to take their Vial up to 2. And we set a stop on their draw step, and we are going to Field of Ruin them. Now, this was just a misclick. Cavern of Souls is clearly the better land to hit over Ancient Ziggurat. Shouldn't really matter. It's basically just that Ziggurat can't cast more Vials. That's probably the only non-creature spell they have in their deck post-board. Or pre-board, excuse me. However, we still want to hit the correct lands, and technically that was the incorrect land. No big deal, though. And we did it on the draw step just in case they happen to have, they're probably the 2 basics they play in hand. They, of course, didn't. That's fine. They're going to cast a Meddling Mage. Alright, you got it. We just kind of have to let that resolve and see what they choose. Liliana the Veil. Alright, that's a pretty good name. They're going to violin something here. So here, in case it's another Meddling Mage, basically, I'm very happy to push this Meddling Mage. I would be pretty happy to do that no matter what. Just to, again, to stay ahead, to not get janked out by these Meddling Mages, locked out. But especially because it's actually locking out one of my better plays right now. So for that reason, I'm very happy to just push this Meddling Mage. They could have vialed in a Thalia there in theory, so definitely correct to just push while that ability's on the stack. And they then chose not to use it. Interesting. So maybe that was a bluff, or maybe our push on the mage forced them to change their plans. Regardless, land for turn is actually kind of a fine draw, because otherwise it might be a toss-up between Kalitas versus Tracker, but here I'm very happy to just play a land, Windmill Slam the Kalitas, and then know that we have another land in hand to make a clue later on down the road. Kalitas is way too good not to play, and the opponent, in fact, is just going to scoop to him. They're not coming back from it, and that's totally fine with me. It looks like they left their Vial on 2, and they didn't draw a 3rd land, so one of their better cards there might have been a Reflector Mage. Even that I think we can beat with Lily and Tracker in hand, and then the Kalitas coming down later. We have not taken a single point of damage yet either, but yeah, the opponent looks like they were kind of just too far behind. So definitely feels great to sneak a game 1 from humans. They did mulligan nice and low, and our somewhat risky keep paid off. So that all is just fine with me. Let's go to the sideboard, though, and see what to do against this deck. Alright, my friends, against 5-color humans, we want any card that can kill a thing. And it gets a little bit more technical after we do that, but that is for sure the first order of business. Anything that can kill stuff. So that means the big X for 1 potential cards like Maelstrom Pulse, Damnation, Engineered Explosives. Liliana the Last Hope is definitely very, very good. Not only can she mow down X1s while ticking up, she can also kill a Phantasmal Image no matter what it's copying. Her -2 is relevant sometimes as well, but really she's just very, very good. Deathmark is a very nice card. Hits a majority, I believe, of what they play. Certainly a lot of the very important ones to hit. And those cards are all fantastic. Whoops, I still have a second Collective Brutality somehow over here. That second Collective Brutality that's in our sideboard, that'll come in as well. It's the least impressive of all of these kill spells, and that's mostly just what it is as a kill spell. Occasionally the Life Drain can help stabilize you a bit as well. But we still just want anything that can kill a human. Beyond that, the only card I'm really interested in besides those kill spells is going to be the Kitchen Finks. They are a deck that pressures your life total pretty well. Kitchen Finks is just a body that can stand up and be counted. It can trade really well with a decent number of their things, and it's not the worst chump blocker in the world if they're just running you over with a gigantic Champion of the Parish. So those 7 cards are the ones I want, and that's pretty much it. Where it gets a little more technical, a little more subtle, is probably in terms of what comes out. So here's what I like to do. Number 1, we just cut all the Thought Seizes no matter what. I like to kind of trim discard against Ether Vial decks anyway. And when they pressure your life total as well as humans does, leaving in the Inquisitions, cutting the Thought Seizes, clearly the way to go, in my opinion. But what else from there? So it's actually going to change somewhat significantly based on player draw. At least the way I like to do things. So let's just organize this a little bit better to show you what I like to do. So we're going to be on the draw for this upcoming matchup, and for this upcoming game, excuse me. And 2 cards specifically that get a lot worse on the draw against humans are Dark Confidant and Liliana of the Veil. While they're both still pretty decent in the matchup overall, I actually like to cut 2 of each when I am on the draw. So these 4 will go bye-bye, and then we're looking at this as your 60 when on the draw. But then when we're on the play, we want to bring some of these cards back in. We can leverage them a lot better on the play. Neither is still the absolute best card in the matchup, if you ask me. So when we're on the play for Game 3, if there is one, I like to bring in 1 of each back into the fold. We've got 3 of each, and then we're going to cut away a couple Tireless Trackers to make way for those. So Tracker, Veil, and Confidant are all kind of cards that are borderline in terms of their efficacy. Like, all of these sideboard cards are pretty much awesome, no matter when we find them. And then there are cards that are a little bit better or worse based on when specifically we find them. Inquisition's a good example of this, but Veil and Dark Confidant fall into that category as well. Tireless Tracker is just generally like a decent but slow card in the matchup. Doesn't change that much player draw. So basically, I rate, like, I'm still fine seeing exactly 1 Bob or exactly 1 Lily of the Veil. Pretty much player draw no matter what. But multiple copies of those, I think the second Bob and the second Lily is better than a tracker on the play, but worse than a tracker on the draw, if that makes sense. So that's why I sideboard the way I did, and yeah, let's head over to Game 2. Alright, my friends, well, we're on the draw here against humans for Game 2, and it looks like a repeat of what we experienced last match, where we have a one-lander that we just have to mull, and this one-lander in particular is awful. There's no redeeming factors that are sufficient to justify the risk. So, obvious mulligan. Our opponent keeps 7, and this is yet another repeat. We mull a 1-land 7 down to a no-land 6, so this hand looks a lot better, but of course we still can't keep it. Down it goes. Tarmogoyf and 4 lands. Well, that's not a very inspiring 5, but it's probably better than 4. And we've got another land on top. That obviously goes straight to the bottom. Well, not looking good, especially because they go Cavern into Vial. Vial, I think, is more likely than not to come out against us, but they left it in. They're rewarded for that. And we have yet another land on top. What is this? This is just the Tarmogoyf living in the wilderness alone, with no other friends and no spells to keep him company. Just Tarmogoyf and lands. That's our game plan here. So the opponent vials in a champion of the parish. Then they follow up with Thalia. That's a nice start on the play. It really is. We draw another Tarmogoyf, okay? Well, we're going to fetch because we are interested in thinning out our deck and growing our Tarmogoyf, even though right now it cannot profitably block either. We might as well start growing the Goyf. And we just kind of have to put our hands up and say, do your worst. They crack a Horizon Canopy, so their hand is not at least completely stacked right now, but they play another champion. That's pretty good. They're going to hit us for 5. I don't think we take the block quite yet. And our draw is Deathmark. Well, that is the first piece of good news we've had in quite some time. So we draw the Deathmark, and we quite clearly have to cast it this turn. We get to Deathmark the champ. Having to pay the Thalia tax means that we cannot, unfortunately, have a double spell turn laying out our other Tarmogoyf. If we could have, we might have been potentially interested in an attack, but regardless, we definitely stay back with this Goyf. And we are severely punished for that tax by the Reflector Mage on the Goyf, which would be bad enough in and of itself. But now the fact that we were not able to play out that second Goyf last turn, yeah, it's just very bad news for us, so we are getting tempoed out of the game, but we at least did draw some action. We drew a Scavenging Ooze. That's not the worst. And, because there is only one creature to eat, we, instead of playing Swamp into Ooze and holding it up twice, we'll just play a Treetop Village this turn, because we only have one activation that we care about anyway. However, the opponent's got a Phantasmal Image for Reflector Mage on our end step. Well, that's about as bad as it gets. We'll gain a life, I guess, before we get bounced. But bounced we will. Get bounced we will. And the opponent's got a nice wide board. They find a Horizon Canopy, they cash it in, and they find another champion, so here comes the army of men, hitting us down to 1. It is Damnation or Bust, and we draw a Scooze. That's gonna do it. That's gonna do it. So, not, even in this matchup, not the most intricate games you've ever seen, not the most decision points. They just kind of mulliganed pretty hard in game 1, and we crushed them. And then here in game 2, we mulliganed pretty hard, and they crushed us. So, nothing we could have done differently here. We just kind of got curved out on. It shows you the power of all of these cards. Even Thalia, who was not at her best here, comfortably outsized by the threats we found, and we didn't have the non-creature spells for her to tax. The one point in which she was relevant, taxing us, taxing our Deathmark and making it so we could not go Deathmark into Goyf, well, that proved to be very, very impactful in this game. So even though she, again, was not at her best, she still played a role. Champion of the Parish with the beats, and Reflector Mage with the tempo play. That's basically what humans needs to put together a win against us, and they sure did it here. So, tough break, but let's go to game 3, see if we can get him when we're on the play. Alright, my friends, now this is what we're talking about. This is a hand. We have Inquisition for turn 1. We have the X for 1 potential of EE and Last Hope. We have yet more spot removal of Trophy, and we don't have a threat per se, a traditional threat, but hey, between Treetop Village being a threat and a blocker, and Liliana the Last Hope kind of serving as a win condition, I think we've got everything we could really ask for, so this is a great hand. We're going to keep it. And the opponent keeps 7-2, so nobody's mulling to oblivion this time. We're going to have a real game on our hands, and let's see what they're working with. So Inquisition of Kozilek is going to reveal, kind of like the Bogle's hand, it's kind of Thoughtseize proof, and it's got 2 lands and 5 spells. It's a strong hand, so what do we do? Well, if they only had 1 drop, I would just take the 1 drop. I would just slow them down, take away the Noble Hierarch, make their hand awkward, make their curve bad. If they only had 1 real payoff card, I would take the payoff card. They don't. Neither of those things apply. They've got 2 Noble Hierarchs, so they're going to cast a Mana Dork turn 1 no matter what we do here. But at the same time, they don't really have a big payoff card. Like, they don't have Thalia's Lieutenant. They don't have Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, which might be a problematic card for us to beat with all of this interaction in our hands. Instead, they just kind of have, like, a Meddling Mage, which is not very good against us. That's another card that can come out a lot of the time. And Meddling Mage is likeliest to name probably Fatal Push or Liliana of the Veil, neither of which are in our hands. So I don't care about that yet. I don't care about the image. And so I guess we just take the Kitesail Freebooter. This is going to conceal information. It's going to stop them from, even temporarily taking something away. It stops them from getting an evasive attacker, which can, in some windows, pressure our Planeswalker as well. So I think that was the correct take, but again, kind of a strangely discard-proof hand. And that red mana had me a little bit confused, but looks like they just misclicked, and indeed it is the turn 1 Noble Hierarch. Dark Confidant. Dark Confidant's a very interesting draw, so here we could go EE on 1 and pass. We play Treetop Village, pass. That's actually pretty tempting, because it means they're going to want to slow roll their other Hierarch around the EE, and then we can tick the Liliana, the Last Hope, up. On turn 3, we can go Lily, the Last Hope, tick her up, kill your Noble Hierarch, and then potentially take over the game from there. The big problem with that is kind of twofold. Number one, you've got the redundancy, the overlap. Like, yeah, you get to kind of force them to slow roll into your own hands. But then your EE on 1 isn't necessarily doing much for the rest of the game. So even though that's cute and it's still kind of powerful, you know what else is powerful? Is playing a Dark Confidant on turn 2 when you're on the play. That's also powerful. So in the end, I see the merit in going EE Treetop Village. The other thing that's nice about that is it for sure allows us to have an untapped land turn 3 for Lily the Last Hope. So definitely was an interesting call, but in the end I just opted for the good old Bob. No matter what Bob shows us, and no matter what they do here, we can probably have an acceptably powerful turn next turn. We will have to see what they do. It's going to be Noble Hierarch into Phantasmal Image, naming Dark Confidant. Okay, well, that's a pretty good turn for them. So now we really want to hit an untapped land here. And we do. It's an Overgrown Tomb and a Liliana of the Veil. Tomb revealed by Bob, so that is quite nice. And I think, especially when you're on the play and you're kind of ahead like this, you more or less always take your window for the Liliana the Last Hope ticked up to kill a Phantasmal Image. It is just too good. And we are actually ahead of the humans on cards right now as well. We're ahead on board. We're ahead on cards. We don't want to let them untap with their Phantasmal Image of Dark Confidant. We don't want to let them catch back up. We'll attack with our own Dark Confidant because even with just what they have on board, the Noble Hierarch becomes a 2-3. We're not going to chump block a Hierarch, so we just attack with the Bob. And let's see what they've got. They've got Cavern of Souls, and they've got Mantis Rider. Okay, well, we are... that's pretty much the best card they could possibly have in terms of getting our Liliana of the Last Hope off the field this turn, which they really have to do. So it's quite a nice turn that they put together. They get to play a Mantis Rider, which is a very good threat. They get to answer our Last Hope, and they get to play a Meddling Mage naming Fatal Push. It's all pretty good. We flip Inquisition of Kozilek off of Bob, and we draw Tarmogoyf for turn. So a couple powerful cards. What do we do? What do we do? Well, lots of options here. Lots of options. But I think we want to begin by casting this Inquisition simply because it's the only window we can really use it. So, while it could whiff, I think I wanted to try casting it here. We are rewarded. We take a very good card out of their hand. Bye-bye Thalia's Lieutenant. So that feels pretty good. And here, I think my life total is relevant enough that I just want to go ahead and plan to trophy away this Mantis Rider. So, no point in doing that on their turn or anything like that. We'll just maybe have them use up these, send in the Rider, try to get their Exalted triggers, maybe it attacks alone, and all that. Then we get to really kind of time walk them as far as their board pressure and their putting damage across is concerned. However, they drew Meddling Mage for turn, so that made me, we could go for the high risk, high reward play and just let the Meddling Mage resolve. And unless they name Assassin's Trophy, I really don't care about it, right? But because they're casting it, yeah, I think the safe play, the safe line is to just trophy away the Mantis Rider in response. This allows them to put together a good attack here. Unfortunately, we don't get to time walk them in that sense, but I do think we're far enough ahead in every way except life total that we have to answer that Mantis Rider for sure. And we're far enough ahead, like I said, in every other way, that we don't want to take the high-risk, high-reward plays in general from here on out. We just want to make sure our stuff resolves. We want to make sure we don't lose to variance from here on out because we are far enough ahead. And, yeah, they named the trophy. Granted, they already saw one, so maybe they would have named something different if not. But still, I'm glad I took the line that I did. And here, again, I'm ahead. I'm ahead on resources, and I'm behind on life. So if we get hit for 4, with all the Exalted triggers still floating around potentially, then we're taking hits off Bob, plus they can top deck Mantis Riders. I chose to chump block. You could certainly argue that line. I thought about it for a while. It wasn't an easy decision, but in the end I did throw the Bob heroically in front of a Meddling Mage. And so here I actually agonized quite a bit, again, over some decisions, because you could just kill a Meddling Mage with Collective Brutality and then play out a Tarmogoyf. That would be fairly acceptable. But here's the thing. You could also just play out Engineered Explosives. And EE on 2, I think, is more valuable at this point than EE on 1. Obviously, the Meddling Mages, they're not that bad, but they're kind of the things we care a little bit more about now. And, of course, EE on 2 is going to be a lot harder to pull off if I run out of Goyf. So, I'm pretty happy to just take my 2-for-1 this turn, and the opponent is going to go ahead and just attack with the Noble Hierarch. So that's fine with me. It's cleverly getting some damage across in the face of this EE. However, it does mean that if they had another 2-drop, they were kind of slow rolling it, but instead they just have a land. So that's very good for me. I'm very happy to have faded a relevant draw step there. So, end step, we'll clean up the Meddling Mages, we'll untap, we'll draw another Collective Brutality. Alright, that's fine. So, I'm just going to play a Tarmogoyf here and kill a Noble Hierarch. Pretty happy to keep the board clear. I'll be a little bit more conservative maybe with my next one, but for now, we're trying to basically set up a way in which we can keep the board clear with edicts. Therefore, even though the Noble Hierarchs are not that much of a problem anymore, we still want to keep the board at least somewhat clear. They rip a Phantasmal Image off the top. That's actually a pretty good draw in a vacuum, but unfortunately for them, we draw a collective. We have another Collective Brutality in hand, and even more unfortunately for them, we drew an untapped land for turn, so we get to kill the Phantasmal Image. It's sacrificed when we target it with Brutality. Then we get to do what I was just mentioning last turn and keep the board totally clear with an Edict effect. The opponent just scoops to that. Now, this is game 3. If I were them, I might have played it out a little more. They could top deck a Mantis Rider, get the Liliana off the field. Or hey, they could even just top deck a Reflector Mage. Now they still have the Liliana to deal with, but they basically have 2 turns to deal with her. If they could have had 2 good draw steps and I could have had 2 bricks for my 2 draw steps and they might have been back in it. But, right now they are behind for sure. They're facing down a 6/7 Tarmogoyf, a Treetop Village, and a Liliana on 1, and they are going to the mercy of their top deck. No question about it, they are behind. However, they've still got a few turns to play it out, is all I'm saying. So, a little bit surprised to see that concession right then and there, but granted, I do expect to have taken home the game from there for sure. So, regardless, I've mentioned this before, I do enjoy Golgari versus humans. It feels like Magic as it was meant to be, We've got some strong thematic elements of kind of the tribe of humans banding against all kinds of crazy stuff over on our side, and we've got lots of interaction, lots of compelling decision points. The games play out pretty differently every time, and both decks at the end of the day are trying to disrupt along the way to winning by turning creatures sideways. So it's a beautiful thing. It's a fairly 50-50-ish matchup in my opinion. And of course it always feels good when we come down on the W, in the W column, on the side of victory. So we got them there, we got the humans, and we advanced to 3-1 in the league. Good times, my friends, and I will see you for the final round. And here we are, my friends, 5th and final round of this comp league, and we have won all 5 die rolls. I don't know if I ever recall this happening in a league to me in the history of my career, but it happened here, so I can't say it's never happened anymore. And our hand is fine. It's a little light on gas. It's a little light on gas, but it's certainly one that we can keep in a blind game 1, and of course, open on the Inquisition of Kozilek, and we see some kind of unholy deck. Whenever we see red and white plus Simian Spirit Guides, we know we're in for something that's perhaps prism-y, or certainly likes to cheat things out. So it's unclear exactly what we're looking at here. We see 2 lands, 2 mana accelerants, the Simian Spirit Guides, of course. We see a Phyrexian Revoker, interesting. we see a couple forms of removal, Declaration of Stone and Dismember. Note that both of these cards, especially Declaration and Stone, are pretty clearly inferior to Path to Exile overall. This makes me very, very suspicious for Blood Moon, because why would you be playing these cards over Path to Exile, on average, unless you're trying not to give the opponent basics? The basic planes also reinforces this opinion, so I'm suspicious for the Moon, and here I actually just went ahead and took away the Dismember, because right now I would rather, if they want to give me a clue to answer my Tarmogoyf, well, at least I can find another threat, hopefully. They find a Leonin Arbiter off the top, and they're going to turn 1 Simian Spirit Guide into Leonin Arbiter. Very interesting. Well, definitely don't want to make the mistake of fetching here. Definitely push the Leonin Arbiter before we do anything else. And then I went ahead and played out the Verdant Catacombs, because let's say they rip a Blood Moon for a turn and they go Prairie into Simian Spirit Guide into Blood Moon. I definitely want to be able to fetch something in response, and in this case I'd rather fetch a forest than a swamp, because I want to be able to play my Tarmogoyf. So let's see what they do. Prairie into Revoker. So just on the, definitely don't want to get blown out by the Revoker naming my fetch land on board there. So let's see what they name with the Revoker. It's going to be Liliana of the Veil. Sure, that's a decent blind name, but wouldn't you know it, we draw Liliana the Last Hope for turn. So that was the absolute best possible draw, because now we get to play her, take up, kill the Revoker, and all of a sudden we are in a severely commanding position. Now, do note that I chose to use my Marsh Flats there instead of Blooming Marsh, even though Blooming Marsh will enter tapped henceforth. We're playing around Revoker effects, we're playing around Leonin Arbiter, we're playing around Blood Moon. Many, many incentives there to use the Marsh Flats instead of the Blooming Marsh, even though 99% of games you would play the Marsh there, for all of the usual reasons. Opponent's got a Smuggler's Copter, sure, and they will pass. Alright, so, we're not doing all that much, but again, we are pretty far ahead. So what I chose to do here is to actually use a Field of Ruin, hit the Prairie, potentially taking them off of red, but who knows. And more importantly, I'm just going to keep playing around Blood Moon as best as I can. We're going to thin out our deck a little bit. So now I've got double black and single green. We're not worried about Blood Moon at all. We get to play our Tarmogoyf, and they have to go get a Wastes. So either they don't have basic Mountain, or they do, but they would rather make sure they're casting something that's colorless. Now this makes me think they're playing some kind of Eldrazi in here as well. So, again, who really knows what they're up to, but that's what I'm seeing. Just, when you're against these decks that are clearly trying to do something busted, you have to use all of the little clues you can to try to play around their prison cards, play around their I win cards. So there goes a Declaration in Stone on our Tarmogoyf. We know they still have a Simian in hand, plus 1 unknown. We draw Thoughtseize for turn, that's pretty good. So let's start off with the Thoughtseize. We know it's going to have a target. And there we go, a Reality Smasher. So Smasher is the take, for sure. We're stranding them in hand with just a mana accelerant. The Smuggler's Copter is not doing much of anything. Let's crack a clue. Okay, Tireless Tracker. That's a fine one. I would rather keep ticking Liliana up toward Ultimate than roll down and try to blindly mill something over, especially now that I have a threat in hand. I think we just go for the Last Hope ult at this point. Opponent looks like they found a little action here. Chalice of the Void on 1. Okay, not action that we care about at all. And in fact, if I were in their position, I might have considered just using the Simian Guide to put it on 2, because it's just better on 2 against us. That said, maybe they want to draw a red source, use the Simian Guide to crew the Copter, so kind of just a tough position for them overall. But we get to go Tireless Tracker into Overgrown Tomb here. No, might as well just put that in painlessly, because we're not really planning to crack the clue here anyway. And the opponent will take their draw step and scoop it up. They can't beat the Lily the Last Hope emblem, that is for sure. They can find all the prison cards they want. They're not going to beat the infinite generating zombies, that is for sure. They're behind anyway against this tracker, so definitely was an interesting game one here, in my opinion. I think we did everything more or less correct. I think we were correct to take away that Dismember early on. The Liliana the Last Hope top deck was obviously perfect, but we also played effectively around the Arbiter and not only the Arbiter, Revoker, Blood Moon style effects that they did have, but the ones they could potentially have had. So we gave ourselves maximum odds to hit the right cards, and since we left them with the Declaration of Stone in hand instead of the Dismember, they had to give us a clue. The clue found us the tracker, and we just took over the game from there. So their deck did not come together very well. It was a little bit awkward, a lot of stuff kind of not doing much, just that's kind of the nature of these decks that try to get free wins by powering out like turn 1 Chalice or turn 1 or turn 2 Blood Moon, you know? You pay for it by having these hands that look kind of like a mess, and, you know, a little bit of disruption can really cripple them, and that's what we saw here. So I still don't know exactly what the opponent's up to, but let's take a look at the sideboard. I'll show you what I did. Alright, my friends, so we are against some kind of Boros Eldrazi prison deck, as best as I can tell. I guess it's technically a 3-color deck because they play wastes as well, and they need that colorless mana to cast some things, but some kind of red-white Eldrazi. Maybe it's not a prison deck, but you know, I did see signs of Blood Moon, and we saw proof of Chalice of the Void, so we can call it, it has some prison elements, that's for sure. Regardless, what do we do against them? Well, I really, really like Maelstrom Pulse. That is for sure one of the cards that absolutely comes in. From there, it gets a little bit murkier. So, let's see. Kitchen Finks is a maybe board card, but ultimately, it's a little undersized relative to the Eldrazi. The life gain is not the most relevant it can be, and double green could be problematic if it is indeed a Blood Moon deck. Engineered Explosives is also a maybe board card. Definitely can hit Chalice of the Void. We saw it can hit Smuggler's Copter as well. But Chalice is not that great against us, and I think most of their permanents that we care about are going to be 3 and up. So, Damnation, also a decent maybe board card, but again, that Smuggler's Copter, the Haste of Reality Smasher, the Prison Elements, Damnation doesn't line up particularly well against them. And I think if we can stick a lot of our threats are pretty good, so we don't really want to be wiping the board. Deathmark just doesn't really do much. Collective Brutality I don't think you want against Eldrazi decks or really against prison decks, and this is kind of both. I don't think we want it, although they do play Dismember, Declaration, and Stone. It has targets. I'm still going to say no to it. Fulminate Er Mage is a good solid maybe board card against these Eldrazi decks, for sure. No question about that. Nissa Vital Force, I hate to just be like maybe, but she is also a maybe board card here because she is going to line up. She's going to be a big haymaker. This match could get grindy and all that stuff. But then again, you know, if they curve out on us, if they're kind of locking us out of colors, maybe she's just too clunky to play. And if they're using Leon and Arbiter to kind of ghost quarter us out of the game, which I assume is part of their plan, also might not get to 5 mana. So I'm just showing you everything that you could consider here, basically, but it's unclear whether much of this stuff is good at all. Liliana the Last Hope, I mean, hey, she was awesome there. I guess we put her in the maybe board card, too. I didn't see any graveyard mechanics, so no Spellbomb, no Cage, and I don't think we want Extraction, so there's legitimately only one card I'm sure I want, and it's called Maelstrom Pulse. This card just comes in so often. This is no exception. Then we've got 8 maybe board cards to consider. I don't really know what to do here, so I'll show you what I did. Just for the purposes of this game too, I was like, alright, I don't exactly know what they're up to. I'm so on the fence about so many of these cards that I am just going to be extremely conservative with my sideboarding. So I went ahead, I took out 1 Collective Brutality. Like I said, I don't think we really want it in general against a deck like this. And I took out one Scavenging Ooze, right? Because we might expect Relic or other forms of Grave Hate. Scooz is probably our least impressive 2-drop anyway. So, Brutality out, Scooz out, Maelstrom Pulse in, and then I believe I actually brought in the EE because something about the way the game played out there made me anticipate them leaving in Chalice of the Void. I don't know why, but I just kind of had a hunch, okay, I think this deck is going to leave in Chalice against me, even though it's probably not the best. EE can also, if I'm right about it being a Blood Moon deck, can also potentially get up to 3 colors to remove Blood Moon, among other things. And we did see more 2-drops than usual for an Eldrazi-based deck, because we saw Leonin Arbiter, we saw Smuggler's Copter. So I think EE, we have seen enough to bring it in, even though you don't usually want it against Eldrazi builds. And I was like, you know what? These Planeswalkers, it might be a little bit greedy. I explained the limitations of Finks and Damnation, and Fulminate Er Mage might be the best of what's over here, but it's worse on the draw, and I still don't exactly know what I'm in. What my preferred configuration is, what I'm exactly facing. So I was just super conservative here for this game too, and I only sided in 2 cards and out 2 cards, and I said, well, we're going to see how this game goes, and then we'll go back to the drawing board if need be. So that's what I did. Let's go to game 2. Okay, my friends, here we are on the draw against this red-white, kind of Eldrazi Taxes, kind of Eldrazi Prison deck, whatever you want to call it. And for the 3rd game 2 running, this happened to us match 3, match 4, and now here in match 5 we have a 1-land 7. Both times we followed up with a mull to a no-land 6. So here, number 1, I'm skittish about those mulls. Number 2, we're on the draw. So we have a decent chance to hit that 2nd and 3rd land that we need, at least the 2nd one. Number 3, this is actually a fantastic hand. We know that Fatal Push is live in this matchup. We know that Discard is amazing in this matchup. We can catch up with Bob. We've got a Scooz to stabilize the board potentially. This hand has, unlike the others that we mulled, the other 1-land 7s that we mulled, this hand has a whole lot of incentives to roll the dice here and try to keep a 1-lander. So, you know what I did, my friends? I rolled the dice. Our opponent keeps 7, so will we. Here's another big problem, besides just being a generally risky 1-lander. We might have to Fetch Shock, which, if I'm right about the Blood Moon, could be very bad. But regardless, this is what we did. They lead off on an Eiganjo Castle. This can protect legendary creatures, so now I'm kind of suspicious for, Thalia, maybe? But regardless, we don't draw a land. So, okay, that's pretty bad. And I think I just have to take the shock here. If they have a Blood Moon, we're going to take it out of their hand. If not, then shocking is correct. So, we fetch shock, and we see, indeed, this looks more like a black-white Eldrazi Taxes deck or something kind of similar. So we see number 1 that I was correct. They left in Chalice of the Void. Number 2, we see Dismember and Leonin Arbiter that we knew about, and Arbiter in particular is very, very scary. If they find some Ghost Quarters with our 1-land keep, we could be just absolutely eliminated from the game without doing much. They also have some other stuff that we haven't seen yet. Spyglass, not a card I care that much about right now. The only thing it turns off in my hand is Scooz. Obviously, it's good against the Lilianas later on, but for now, we don't care about that. And then, it must be said, they don't have much mana acceleration. They do have an Eldrazi Temple, but no Eldrazi in hand. Only 2 lands total. Baneslayer Angel, very good against us, but way down the road, we can't worry about her yet. Couldn't take her even if we could. So what do we take here? Well, I actually think we have to take away the card that is not very good against us, because our hand is so dependent, so dependent on playing these 1-drops. We've just got to take away that Chalice. Pass to the opponent. They go Temple into Arbiter. Sure. Untap, and oh no, we draw a Scooz. That's so bad. Not only is it not our 2nd land, but It's just a very redundant piece right now in every way. It's just so redundant. So we just push the Arbiter. Thankfully, we get to push the Arbiter and pass. And the opponent doesn't have a third land either, so at least there's that. And they pass back to us. Interesting that they didn't want to just run out the Spyglass and blind name it, but they chose not to, so good enough for me. I'm going to fetch with my Verdant Catacombs. Thankfully, we have hit our second land drop, and I'm just going to run out of Skoos. I don't want to expose my Bob to a known dismember. I assume they're going to use it here for the sake of mana efficiency. And indeed they will, so sure. I'm so happy with that. Opponent's got to play here. It's another Arbiter and no land to follow it up. Alright, beautiful. So we draw Blooming Marsh. Alright, this is just great. This is just awesome. So we're hitting our lands. We'll push the Arbiter, and now it's time to run out the Bob. They could have another form of removal, but we don't know that they do, and I would rather make them have it. I'd rather play out the Bob instead of, trying to be really careful. Thoughtseize them first. So I just ran out Dark Confidant. Opponent does finally find land number 3. And they just play a Spyglass, which they could have done for a couple turns now, and they name Skoos. So they've seen our hand, they name Skoos, and they pass. Alright, not something I care that much about, at least right now. So Dark Confidant will flip Liliana the Last Hope, so taking 3 right off the bat is not ideal. However, pretty good draw overall. But do we want to play her here? First, let's see if Bob gets through. Like I said, I don't put them on Path to Exile, but you never know. So we attack with the Bob. Bob will connect. Then I think I would rather Thoughtseize here than play out my Liliana, and we see quite the interesting hand. So we see that they chose to play the Spyglass over Thalia Heretic Cathar last turn. I don't know. I mean, I think Thalia is a beating against my deck. I might have just really slammed her, but maybe they wanted to kind of clear the way, sort of, with the Spyglass, even though they can't really do anything about removal. Regardless, we have a problem on our hands, because Thalia, like I said, she's a beating against us. We have removal for her, but that would ramp them into Gideon. Gideon is also a problem for us. And then, of course, Baneslayer Angel, they're getting closer to her. She's still a problem at the top end. So what do we do? Well, I kind of just think we're supposed to take away the Thalia and hope they brick on lands for at least a turn so we can kind of make more land drops of our own, get our hand going, develop our board. Unfortunately, the Skoos is only a Grizzly Bear, but we'll still play him out. And they rip a land immediately, so we're a bit punished for that, and they just play Gideon, ally of Zendikar. Now we're kind of in the same situation. Before, we couldn't really trophy the Thalia because it would ramp them to Gideon. Now we can't really trophy the Gideon because it's going to ramp them to Baneslayer, at least until we find more removal. Right now, with only the trophy, it's a bit of a problem. Inquisition is our draw for turn, and Tomb is our flip off of Bob. So the Tomb is okay, but Inquisition is totally dead. If that was a Thoughtseize, I'd be very happy. We could Thoughtseize the Baneslayer, we could trophy the Gideon, and we would be off to the races. But now what do we do? Well, I'm going to attack the Gideon here. I don't mind if they trade with my Skoos, because it's only a Grizzly Bear. I don't mind if they trade with my Bob, because I have another. I don't think playing out 2 Bobs is necessarily safe here, so I'm pretty happy to just pressure the Gideon. And sure enough, they take the trade with the Bob. It's a fine trade. It's a fine block. But, yeah, we get to go ahead and run out our other Bob. Now, the other option there was to play Liliana the Last Hope and tick her up. And that was an option, too. No question about it. But I wanted to, I thought it was totally fine there to just, get use out of my other Bob, basically. Now, this incentivized them to fire up the Gideon and start trying to end the game. So they must realize that they're not going to outgrind us, probably, at this point, despite the very good grinding power of Gideon. And now that we have another Bob, they're going to just try to turn him sideways and end the game. And you know what? I've got enough faith in my deck. I've got enough faith in this Dark Confidant. I'm just going to take the 5. No chump blocking for me. We're taking 5. See what else they have to follow it up. A Leon and Arbiter. Sure. Baneslayer still in hand. Pass to us. Dark Confidant flips a Field of Ruin. Alright, good job, Bob. We draw a Tarmogoyf for a turn. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. So, now what do we do? Well, now I think, well, let's use our mana correctly. So first we'll deploy the Field of Ruin. Then we'll use that to play the Lily Last Hope. Now we're going to shrink the Arbiter. So shrinking the Arbiter is great here, because now I'm not really interested so much in trading. They're either going to have to chump block or they're going to lose their Gideon. So we attack Gideon with both. They chump block the Bob. Cool. That's fine with me. Gideon's down to 1. Now it's Tarmogoyf time. Now, they have so many creatures that I'm not that afraid of a Wrath of God or Damnation style effect. And they might be on the card like Settle the Wreckage, but, you know, I can always spot check for that with my Inquisition, right? So, the other great thing about the sequence there is that Tarmogoyf is a 5/6, so they actually cannot attack. They cannot attack through it with the Gideon, who is a mere 5/5. Indestructible 5/5, but still a tad smaller than the Goyf. So the opponent will play nothing. They will make a knight, and they will pass. Alright, Dark Confidant flips another Dark Confidant. That's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. We take 2, which is bad, and the second Bob is pretty redundant. However, we did draw Thoughtseize for turn. I don't see a huge difference between going to 4 and going to 2 in some ways. There is a huge difference in other ways, and I'll explain why. But the main difference is, of course, trying not to die to our own Dark Confidant. But depending on what we see in hand and what we're going to sequence for the rest of the turn, we can, in theory, take up with our Lily the Last Hope to kill our own Bob. This turn, if we need to. If we need to. Now, the reason I have to Thoughtseize here is because, again, I have to spot check for a card like Settle the Wreckage. I need perfect info here to decide whether I can afford to keep my Bob around or not. So, paying the 2 life hurts, but I think it's correct to Thoughtseize here. And we see that they sandbagged a land and the Baneslayer Angel, and I guess they're trying to get pretty cute here. Trying to get a little cute, but they could, of course, have just played Plains into Baneslayer Angel and just said, hey, can you beat this stuff? Can you beat these cards? Can you beat my Gideon, my Knight, and my Baneslayer Angel? But the opponent sandbagged it. They're punished for that. We get to take them off of the Baneslayer entirely with a Thoughtseize. And now, check it out. Now we get to get very, very aggressive here. So, we'll shrink the Knight ally, meaning it's not a threat on the crackback and it's not able to trade. We move to attacks. We've got Bob and Skooz going at the Gideon, so no matter how they block, the Gideon's going down, and we've got the Tarmogoyf coming across for 5. That's all very well, and sure, they take the correct block, they're going to chump the Goyf. Alright, so they're totally empty-handed, they just have a Plains in hand, and now we just get to pass. So here, we're still at the mercy of our Bob trigger, but we actually have a reasonable out to it, but we kind of have to wait. It's the out is going to evolve Assassin's Trophy, but I think it's correct to just wait and see what they do. Their draw for turn was Ghost Quarter. Ghost Quarter is at least some kind of action, but it is pretty lucky for us. We did need to fade that draw step, and it's almost better for us that they just use the GQ, because we get to float green, we get to go get another green source, and then we get to trophy away the Spyglass. Now we've got 2 activations for Skooz. Skooz is now free to gobble things up. And now Skooz is making sure we're not going to die to the Bob trigger on our untap. And we are actually all set. Now, I actually should have done something different here. With the Bob trigger on the stack, I should have eaten at least one more card here, just in case my Bob flipped Kalidas. So I don't think I have it. I didn't bring in my Nissa. Right, so the literal only card there that could have killed me on the flip is Kalidas. I just kind of was auto-yielding to my Bob triggers, and I forgot to un-auto-yield. So definitely something that's worth pointing out. With the Bob trigger on the stack, you go ahead and activate that ooze one more time in this situation, just so Kalidas doesn't troll you into oblivion with Exaxes. So regardless, we flip a land nice and painless. So here we actually just straight up have lethal on board. Out of nowhere, we turn the corner with a 6/6 Skooz, a 6/7 Goyf, and a 2-1 Dark Confidant who did a lot of heavy lifting in terms of card advantage, and that's going to be game. So that was very cool. I really enjoyed. Like I said, there were an unreasonable amount or an unusual amount of non-games. We had the turn 1 scoop. I'm going to get lunch. See you never from our opponent. They scoop the game. They scoop the match. We get the free win. Okay, fair enough. Then we had the Scoop to Your Thoughtseize game 1 against Bogles. Then we mulled to oblivion. Then there was a good interactive game 3. Well, as interactive as we can get against Bogles. Then we had kind of just the top deck, headbutting contest, basically, in the BG Rock mirror match. Yeah, it feels unfortunate to drop that one. There's not much we could do differently, especially because our opponent did give us a window to get back into it with the collective brutality misplay, but, it wasn't to be, so we just kind of lost to draws there. Then in the humans match, even, there were, they kind of mulled down to 5 and got wrecked game 1, and then we mulled to 5 and got wrecked game 2. But the way this league finished up, my friends, we had a really entertaining, really interactive and fun game 3 against humans. And then both of these games here were pretty cool, even though they didn't quite put that coherent of a strategy together against us in game 1. They were a little bit more threatening here in game 2. We had to take the right lines. We had to sequence accordingly, according to our own life total, according to their board, according to what information we had about their hand, which was sometimes imperfect or incomplete. And in the end, the card that we didn't care about, Sorceress Spyglass, was the one that we actually kind of maneuvered our way into dealing with so that our ooze could, number 1, turn the corner and help end the game quickly, and number 2, help give us a buffer against potential death at the hands of our own Dark Confidant. So, really strong finish to the series, both in terms of our results and in terms of how the games played out. I really enjoyed playing against these last couple matches against humans and against whatever this Eldrazi deck is. If somebody's got it knows that this is an archetype that somebody's working on closely, you can feel free to let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I just still kind of assume it's more or less a black-white Eldrazi Taxes deck, but they're playing red instead of black. Otherwise, obviously some differences. That's not going to be a direct port. The difference in the splash color is going to lead to a difference that kind of reverberates throughout the 75, right? But that's probably the closest correlate to a known deck. So it's kind of Boros Eldrazi and Taxes, or, with some prison elements. Who knows? But we took him down here. We showed him the business. Liliana the Last Hope playing a big role in both victories, by the way. Killing the Phyrexian Revoker on curve was amazing in Game 1. And here in Game 2, she didn't blow them out quite as hard, but just shrinking those 2/2s, shrinking the Arbiter, then shrinking the Knight, proved to kind of turn the tides of combat enough for us to pressure the Gideon off the field, and then to just end the game in a timely fashion. So, yeah, I will take that free win in round 1 as a portent of things to come, as an omen, a positive omen, a blessing, that my decision to go to the 4th Dark Confidant is officially been approved by whatever entities control variance in Magic the Gathering. We've got their blessing, my friends. We got the free win round 1, and we had the 4 copies of Confidant, I think, coming into play in a big way. Bob was central to a lot of our wins here. He really was. And in places, multiples were awkward, but even here where they were awkward, we were able to kind of entice the opponent into trading with one of our confidants, and then we just played another. It was totally fine with me. And yeah, so perhaps they will not be as much of a liability as I once feared they would be to play the full playset, but as far as I'm concerned, we've got the official stamp of approval for playing 4 Bobs. We got 4-1 right out of the gates to start. These were the literal first games I played since I changed my list. And granted, it's more like a 3-1 in terms of actual games played, but, the scoreline says 4 wins. the amount of treasure chest and play points we got says 4 wins, so I'm gonna call it the 4-1, and we'll take that any day of the week. It's a great result, and ooh, we really, really, really could have had the 5-0 if the variants had gone our way a little bit more in the BG Rock Mirror. I think based on the configuration of the 75 and based on that one play with Brutality, not to harp on it and no offense to the opponent, but it really was a lifeline for us back into that game. You know, based on all those things, just the luck broke our way a little bit more. We could have got there. We could have got the 5-0, but you know what? We had plenty of good luck in this league, so I'm not going to complain any more than I just did. Great games and well played to all of my opponents, and thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the league. I hope you're enjoying the new look list. We saw Dark Confidant in action. We brought in Damnation a decent amount. That's our other piece of new tech this month. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the content as always. Thank you once again to our brand new Confidant, Ian Ray. Welcome aboard, buddy. Welcome to the fold. Thanks for your support. Thanks again to all of my patrons, and remember, my friends, if you would like access to the tier rewards, and if you would just like to trade value for value, just like a good interactive Magic player should, and support this content, you can follow the link in the description below. Grimflayer MTG is on Patreon. Beyond that, to help my channel grow, you can like, you can share, and above all, you can subscribe. If you're not already subscribed, I would love it if you would. Let's go ahead and leave it there. I'm going to bring you some more League play in the near future. You know it. As soon as I've got time in my schedule, it's going to you. We're going to get some more good results here. We're going to make Golgari very top of the meta as it should be. That is our goal as always. So thanks again for watching. Stay tuned to the channel, and I will talk to you soon. I hope you have a great day.